So take one piece and pass it on. And everybody just take your piece of chaga and sit with it for a minute and look at it. Hold it and smell it if you want.
Oh yeah, can you actually smoke that?
Can you what?
That's smokable. I mean,
I've heard stories of people like combining it with some other smokable herb. I think they use it more like the coal for shisha sort of thing. Or like they grind it up. I don't know though.
Isn't it a coal extender?
Coal extender, that could be.
Makes good tinder.
Yeah, I've heard that. I would never burn chaga though. I'm like, oh, that's like holy, super holy being right there.
What is it, a mushroom or?
So yeah, let's talk a little bit about what it is. I think first it's important for everybody to get a piece in their hand though, before we really dive into that. But we'll talk a little bit about its history, what little I know. And that's another thing, I don't know shit, you know, I'm just like a dude who loves this kind of stuff, and so I do some little half-assed research on Google. Y'all can like learn just as much as me if you just like watch YouTube videos and hang out with plant nerds. It's like, there's nothing special happening here. My brain doesn't like magically work better than other people's. So yeah, this has a long history in Eastern Europe, and probably throughout Europe. It's they're reported to be used for at least like the last 500 years, but it probably goes back thousands and thousands of years. When they found the Otzi and the Otzi? Yeah, when they found that dude, he had Pictoporus vetulinus and Fomes fomentarius on him, and those are both mushrooms that also grow on birch trees. I'm surprised that they didn't find a chaga on him. I'm sure he knew about the chaga, and I'm sure it was something that they were connected with. So yeah, just hold it, look, you know, get a good look at it, and then
That's the Iceman, right? Or the
yeah, the Alps or something like that.
Between Austria and Italy.
Yeah, that's right. There's a
His
discrepancy. Was it Austria or Italy?
appeared when the glacier started to melt.
When was that?
About maybe 15 years ago.
You guys do climate change?
Okay, so whenever you're ready, just kind of take your chaga in one of your hands or in between both of your hands and just close your eyes for a second. And I want you to picture yourself sitting way, way, way high up in the Appalachian Mountains, about 3,000 feet, maybe 2,800 feet up. It's really beautiful. The ground is super spongy and lush. There's so much organic matter that like every step that you take, you sink into the ground like 6 inches, and it's not soggy. It's like just a giant living sponge, so full of life. And there's a nice little creek rolling through the scene, rolling through the valley. You're walking along the creek. It's cool and beautiful, and there's moss and ferns everywhere. It's like green and kind of smoky, hazy, magical vibe, you know, that misty mountain vibe. And you see this big, funky looking black lump on a birch tree. And then you go, oh my God, it's Chaga! And you freak out and do a big old happy dance. And then you boost your friend up onto it. First you check the tree to make sure there's other lumps of chaga higher up the tree. then you boost your friend up onto your shoulders, and he proceeds to hang from the big old lump of chaga and shake it and doing pull-ups on it and trying with all his might. He's just being so strong. It's so in love with that birch tree. It just can't resist its sweetness, and so the chaga's holding on for dear life. Zach's holding on for dear life. I'm like behind him, like, all right, if you fall, I'll make sure that you don't bust your head. And that was about all I did, because he hit the ground pretty hard when the chaga finally let go of the birch tree and sent its last kiss to that birch tree. And that's where this little chunk of chaga came from.
Why is it burnt? Talk what?
It's it looks kind of burnt. That's actually the dark color in it is actually partially from melanin, and
What's that?
melanin is the pigmentation that makes our skin dark, and it's a precursor to melatonin. So one of the stories about chaga, and that's another thing. I want to be very clear that I'm not a doctor, I'm not a magician, I'm not any kind of licensed professional with any sort of like collegiate training, so do your own research, and I would never claim that plants can, diagnose, treat, or cure any illness or ailment. I just believe that they're fucking awesome friends to have around, and there's some times in my life when I'm more into having them around. You know how there are like some friends who are like, you know, really like good in certain situations, like, you know, you just broke up with somebody and like you know that one person to call and you're like, I need you right now, please. They make everything all better, you know. It's the same way with these mushrooms and these plants. There are some times in my life where I'm like, oh, I just cut myself, I really wish Yarrow was around. And then I'll dig out some Yarrow out of my bag and put it on there. And it feels good, and it makes me feel better, so, I don't know. That's all I'm saying. So, one of the stories about chaga is that it can help us with sleep cycles, with being able to fall asleep at night because of that melanin content turning into melatonin. But what chaga is, getting back to that, it's this is actually the mycelium of the mushroom. This isn't an actual fruiting body. This is just the mycelial mass when it hits a tear in the bark or like a broken branch. It'll start to ooze out of that crack very slowly and steadily, and as it grows outward, it's getting exposed to the elements and to the sun and the wind, and so it starts kind of hardening its outer layer to be that black, melanin rich, supposedly betulinic acid rich, but I saw something recently that said that nobody can find legitimate assays where betulinic acid was proven to be in there. Maybe, Helen, you could talk to that dude who's doing the same thing that Jim did for the mushrooms. Maybe talk to him and see if he's got any assays on if there's betulinic acid in chaga, because that would be...
Enough, betulinic acid is something that Jim Duke always states helps with malignant melanoma. Yeah.
Interesting.
They actually use that, so I was actually interested in what you were saying about melanin. So, yeah. But I'd be happy to talk to him about that.
Cool, yeah, appreciate it. Make a note of it.
You
We know how you roll.
You think that it could potentially have it because it's coming off of the birch itself? Like, it's already, it's like taking from the betula itself. Is that what you mean by it?
The betulinic acid content?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the betulinic acid comes from within the birch. I think the melanin content comes from exposure to light.
I think
Now, if this is the mycelium, there's gotta be a fruiting body somewhere. In this case, the mycelium
Yes.
is actually going up and down the precambrial layer of the birch tree and then coming out where it's been cut open. Because it has to go somewhere. So the mycelium also probably has to be connected into the ground, into the roots, and a way of becoming like a network. What is the fruiting body? Where would that be found? Would that be at the base of the tree?
So this is another reason why I revere Chaga so much, is because it's so mysterious. Now I heard recently that there is somebody who has photo documentation of the fruiting body of Chaga, and somebody else told me there might be like 4 or 5 pictures of the Chaga fruiting body now. But for a long time, people didn't know how it fruited, and I think there's still a lot of mystery and discrepancy around it as far as like how it fruits and produces spores. So yeah, its reproduction cycle is very like, we don't know a lot about it. So it could potentially be over harvested, and it takes a long time to grow, which is why I said, before we went and took this chunk of chaga, we made sure that there was plenty growing further up the tree, because one of the theories is that it develops these, they call it a mycelial protrusion, and it develops these big lumps of mycelium so that when the birch tree falls, or I don't know, maybe it's like after it dies, or like after it finally dies, like doesn't grow back another leaf ever again, somewhere in that time frame between when the tree dies and when it falls on the ground, it pushes out this one fruiting body one time for like, the chaga could have been there for 40 years or something, and it was just waiting for that moment to fruit, and that's the one time it'll fruit and sporulate. So we want to make sure, if that is the case, that it has plenty of energy there to produce a good amount of fruit bodies, because we don't want to over harvest it. It would be terrible shame for us to get all excited about like, man, it cures cancer, it like makes you strong and shit, it's the best. And then everybody runs around like getting all the chaga, and then there's no more chaga, and we're all like, oh man, we're dumb monkeys.
Buddy.
Killed all the banana trees.
So, quick question: Chaga is not going to be a homebrew option for our, sawdust bags and like steaming. Chaga is not going to be something we can just poke a hole in a bag and grow ourselves.
There are some people who are culturing the mycelium, and there are people who are doing the same thing with things like cordyceps, and I think that is a great, very sustainable way for us to bring that medicine into our lives in like a major way. Definitely think we should do a lot more exploration in that regard and see ways that we can like, not to get like too crazy with it, but I guess really just see ways to help the mycelium thrive and like as close to its natural conditions as we can replicate. And that being said, I also think that fungal medicine cultivated in a lab lacks some kind of magic that comes from the old growth forest,
Sunlight.
Yeah, because there's a lot of, you think about it, it's like this one mycelium has been grown in sterile lab conditions for however long, and this one is like living on a birch tree surrounded by life, like bumping, thriving, juicy, rich life.
And it's fighting for its own survival, because in a lab everything is given to it. It's not struggling to like fend for itself.
Right. So it's learning. It's learning from the birch tree that it's living on. It's learning from all the insects that it's interfacing with. It's learning from all of the other plants and fungi that the birch tree is connected to through its root system. It's learning from the fish in the water that are pooping, that are giving the nutrients to the birch tree, that are giving the nutrients to the chaga. It's like there's a lot of really intense dynamic interactions going on there, and I think that any one of these beings could merit lifetimes of study, lifetimes of investigation, and going deeper and deeper and deeper to understand what's actually happening there, because it's unfathomable.
It also has to defend itself, therefore it can impart its defense to you.
Truth, yeah, a lot of so there are two aspects to any kind of plant medicine or mushroom medicine, just to bring it, open up the scope here a little bit, off of chaga a little bit, and more into any plant, any mushroom that you encounter is going to have primary constituents and secondary constituents, right? The primary constituents are the things like the proteins, the carbohydrates, the fats, and then the secondary constituents are the chemicals, the phytochemicals and mycochemicals that these beings develop in an effort to defend themselves against other forms of life and against any kind of predation, be it viral, parasitic, fungal, bacterial, or just plain simple predation from other mammals. Herbivory, I guess, would be the... Yeah. So, those secondary constituents, a lot of times, have really potent effects. Now see, and now that we're talking about chemicals, I can say, yes, this chemical has been shown in clinical testing to do this thing and that thing and that thing. Isn't that interesting? When I'm talking about a plant, a being, it's not allowed to do anything. But if I'm talking about a chemical, then it's perfectly acceptable for me to cite clinical documents and say this is an antiviral chemical, but this is not an antiviral plant. It's like,
Really?
shut up. So yeah, the secondary constituents. Yeah, like the polyphenols. So like this mushroom has like phenolic compounds. It has lipids, sterols, complex sugars, beta glucans. I don't know how geeky you guys want to get, but basically it's got all kinds of different compounds, and a lot of them have different biological activities. Jim Duke, see, this is the other thing I'm allowed to do legally, is quote other people. And Jim Duke, he believes that probably something like 90 to 95% of all phytochemicals and mycochemicals are biologically active in some way or another, meaning they have some kind of effect on the human organism.
Only 90?
90 to 95%, yeah. I mean,
They all would, wouldn't
yeah, maybe so. I mean, I guess there's some, there's some things that just don't seem to affect us. It's like they were designed for another type of being, It's like, kind of like when you think about neurotransmitters, it's kind of like a lock and key sort of thing. And if the key doesn't match the lock, then it just keeps rolling and ends up getting excreted at some point.
Kind of a mechanical view, right?
Yeah, that's definitely a mechanistic and reductionist kind of approach. I mean, and that's the thing, is anytime that we're talking about things in scientific terms, it requires us to utilize that sort of mechanistic, reductionist sort of approach to understanding things, which means we have to divide things up and slice them up and move them apart and zoom in 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 until we can see a pimple on a proton, because, you know, which is basically what it is. They would give it some fancy name like lumpoid, protonic lumpoid or something, but it's like, you're talking about a zit on a proton, dude. Like, it's a lump, whatever. little tiny bump. You can call it anything. It's like these words. The words in the first place are limited, and then the reductionist scientific approach
so
is
that was
even
your
more
protein
limited.
scientist.
Yeah, well,
Okay, I wasn't sure.
yeah, Jim Duke, he's a doctor. I mean, I don't know. He's a brother though. He's just right on human who spent the last 60 years working with plants and studying the phytochemicals and spending time with the indigenous peoples who originally interfaced and connected with these plant beings and developed like super intense rituals and relationships with them. And, you know, so he's coming at it from both ends of the spectrum simultaneously, and definitely giving favor to the indigenous, aboriginal, whole plant kind of approach. Whole plant, traditional preparation.